The two beautiful young men were brothers, 20 years apart in age. The boy was not even talking yet, and everyone in the family began to worry about it. While their parents were away, the older one always looked after the younger one. They had a lot of fun spending time together. But there were days when it was impossible to relax, especially when the phone rang and I had to go to the hospital quickly. One day, their happiness stopped. The boy's parents died in a car accident. The car his parents were in hit something lying in the middle of the highway. Quite a few people came to their funeral and everyone tried to express their words of comfort, but the young man wanted them all to just keep quiet. His older brother didn't want Shiha to see him in this state, but in fact, he was still young enough to understand everything that was happening around them. The boy did not even realize that he had no one else besides his older brother. It was very strange that he hadn't spoken yet, and even the eldest decided that maybe his brother was autistic. Everyone just couldn't imagine how these two boys would be able to live on their own without their parents. Besides, Shu Hek was already an adult and needed to study. While the two women were trying to discuss the boys, it was at that moment that Shu came in. He was just confused and did not know what to do next, so he turned to his aunt and uncle. The young man understood that the children needed to be paid after the incident, but his relatives knew well that they would not be able to live on their own. The aunt then decided that the boys should have lived with them for a while, and they also took all the money for themselves and did not want to tell Shu about it. As soon as Shu heard all this, he definitely stopped considering such people his relatives. Now the young men began to experience the real reality from which their parents had protected them all their lives, and now everything began to penetrate their souls. Meanwhile, while he was sitting on the bench and trying to collect his thoughts, his friend sat down with him and started talking about work. Shay knew full well that he would have to put his studies on hold for a while and start working to support himself and his younger brother. In fact, his nerves could no longer stand it. He realized that he had a little brother in his arms who would now be with him all the time. Therefore, his friend immediately suggested that he be sent to an orphanage, as it could take at least 20 years to raise him. He immediately remembered himself when he was a child, and that they had once even put a sign on him that he had no mother. Every time he did something wrong, everyone immediately felt sorry for him because his mother left him and his father and ran away to another man. And now he realized that his brother had lost both his parents, so he decided to make sure that he didn't suffer the same way he had. The young Dor knew that they definitely had no family now, and the boy had only him. It was at that moment that he realized for sure that he was ready to raise his little brother and would definitely not give him to anyone. While the brother was talking, the child began to scream loudly because everyone around him was just a stranger. As soon as he noticed his older brother, he immediately ran into his arms. It even seemed that he realized that he had no one else but his brother. At that very moment, the little one began to whisper quietly in his brother's ear. These were actually his first words. They hugged each other tightly and just cried without stopping. After all, the first word the boy said was not his mother, but his brother. It was a great pity that now the boy had no one to call his mother, but only his brother. As soon as the little hands touched his older brother, he realized that they were both bonded for life, and the older one made a promise to himself that he would definitely protect the little one. They both stood in front of the door of their house where they used to live together, but now they could not enter. She thought that her parents were waiting for them there, and as soon as they entered the apartment, everything would be as it was before. But the older brother had only one child left, and now he had to pull himself together and somehow live on. As soon as the funeral was over, there was no time even to grieve a little. My older brother immediately started fiddling with the documents. I had to get a death certificate, send proof of close relationship with relatives and medical bills. There was an investigation into the accident, but they never found the car to which the spring belonged. This meant that insurance payments were not possible at all. Once he calculated how much it would take to raise a child on his own, he was shocked by the amount. Now Vint understood for sure that having parents played a really big role, but when the young man looked at his little brother, he realized that he wanted to do absolutely everything for him, and was sure that he would not allow him to suffer. They tried to spend every free minute together, reading books and having fun as much as they could. He decided that they needed to move, and so he started preparing without wasting any time. Since they couldn't take everything, they had to take only the most necessary things. The kid also tried his best to help. There were moments when the kid fell down with the boxes, but the older man could not be angry with him as he was just trying to help. He had a lot of work to do, and suddenly his father's computer came to hand, but since it was old, he decided to throw it away. But the little boy definitely disagreed with him and took a laptop out of the trash. He kept holding it in his hands and started calling his father. He was well aware that it was his father's thing, so he didn't want them to throw it away. Of course, the older brother could not throw away the thing that Shu-hu liked so much, so they decided to put it in a box and take it with them. While they were getting ready, there were even moments when I had to play cars with the kid. There was not much time, and he had to pack his things, but he could not deny the little one the game. A little while later, he decided to rest himself, even though he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. At that moment, he started calling for his mother. With his little finger, he pointed to the desk where his mother used to work. It was there that his mother's tablet was, and he wanted to take it too. These were the two things their parents used most often. The young man wanted to throw them away, but Shiha thought differently. Even though they were brothers, they thought differently. Suddenly, the door opened and their friend appeared in front of them, bringing donuts to refresh themselves. While the little one was with them, the men decided to have a little chat, but the conversation was not very pleasant. The friend insisted that Shu-hek return to the university, since he was studying there for free. He tried to convince Shu-hek that it was after graduation that he would have to worry about finding a job, and their university could provide a job. So he had to think carefully before deciding to leave his studies, but he didn't even have money to live on. Then his friend pointed a finger at him and emphasized that he knew a solution to the problem that could be solved in just 2 years. But Shu-hek still stood his ground and knew that he would not be able to attend all the classes, as he would have to take care of the baby. But my friend was convinced that he had managed to foresee everything, and therefore could pay for housing, take care of the younger one, and even attend school. There was a kindergarten at their university, but it was for the children of professors. Since my friend was very kind, he had already arranged for Shu-hek's younger brother to be admitted. And while the child is in kindergarten, the young man could attend school and receive a scholarship to pay all the bills. The young man could not even expect such an act from his friend, because all his relatives simply turned their backs on him when he needed help so badly. A little later, he also emphasized that he would introduce him to a professor who could also provide him with a part-time job. The young man could not even say a word. He was so grateful for all the help, although he was not sure that he could accept everything. He now had 2 of his closest men in front of him, trying to support Shu-hyuk as best they could. Later, they moved to a 2-room apartment near the university. The place was away from nightlife. But of course, nothing was possible without Hen's help. He emphasized that in that particular building, the rent had not been raised for 5 years. And it was also clear that the boy and his child did not need to live in a neighborhood where only drunks roamed the streets. Since they didn't have a lot of things, they all managed to get organized by lunchtime. Now they had a new apartment to live in. The next day, the young man was ready to meet with the professor to discuss his new work. The man introduced himself as the head of the department and even apologized for not being able to see him earlier because he was on a business trip. He was well aware of the young man's situation and therefore understood that he was now the head of the family. They had a good discussion about the fact that he should have received a scholarship from the 2nd semester, but he immediately admitted that it would be difficult to attend school as before. But when he heard the amount of the scholarship, he could not contain his emotions. He could not even imagine that students could earn so much. But among all of them, there was one who managed to succeed in his business. So the professor immediately remembered the boy's father and wanted him to follow in his father's footsteps. After this conversation, he was over the moon and flew home to share the news with his brother. In fact, he was ready to continue his father's work, and he also spoke English well enough to be a good translator. The man was glad that they were able to find a common language between them, so he promised to send the example to his email, and then he had to translate it. He tried to help the guy because he saw him trying his best. The professor would not have wanted to help any other student. As soon as he got home, he saw how well the boys got along and had fun. The young man immediately picked up the baby and wanted to tell them everything right away. He was happy that he would now do the same job as his father. It was all thanks to his friend who helped him so much, but now he was very hungry and immediately offered to get something to eat. After a hard day, I had to wash the kid well and put him to bed. After reading a book at night, the kids fell asleep very quickly, and now they had to work. When the young man was working like this, he felt like he was reminding himself of his father who used to do the same thing. Although his father was not an interpreter, he believed that knowledge of foreign languages could open up the whole world to a person, and so he started his career as an interpreter. Thanks to his work, the man met his new wife, with whom they started a family, and his father even thought about moving to Singapore, as he received a pretty good offer. But the more time my father spent abroad, the less he paid attention to his family. Then their family began to gradually drift apart, and then after 3 months of deliberation, his parents divorced. Shihake stayed to live with his father, who quit his job as an interpreter, returned to Korea, and began translating texts. And now, after all these years, the guy has also sacrificed a lot for his brother. This was probably his destiny. Suddenly, as he continued to work, he realized that something had happened to his laptop. The computer was only 2 years old, but if it was sent for repair, he would be forced to delay his work. Suddenly, he remembered his father's laptop, which the boy wouldn't let him throw away. Now it was like a godsend. But when he touched it, it immediately began to shock. And it was very strange, because the computer was not connected to electricity. At that moment, he even thought that his father had come to make sure that his boys were doing well. It was just a dream. When he woke up, he saw on his watch that he had slept for 6 hours, and now he had to finish his work quickly. He realized that he was very tired over the past few days, but there was no other way out, and he had to work to survive. But he immediately began to feel that he was doing quite well, probably because of his knowledge of English at such a high level. He managed to translate 50 pages in just 40 minutes. It was just perfect. As soon as it was 5 o'clock in the morning, his younger brother woke up. Even though he knew that kids woke up very early, it was a bit much. Then the boys began to get ready, some to go to school and some to kindergarten. This was the first day of their new life on their own. The young man emphasized that he was taking the boy to the kindergarten. This was the place where he was supposed to be while his brother was busy studying and working. But before kindergarten, they decided to take the laptop in for repair, even though it turned out that there was nothing seriously wrong with it. It was really good news, but it was very strange why it stopped working. On the street, the boys met a couple who were just delighted with the little boy. They immediately struck up a conversation. The couple couldn't get enough of the little boy, but it was time to say goodbye. At that moment, he even thought that perhaps because he had been electrocuted, he had gained some kind of superpower that allowed him to work so quickly. Very soon they came to the kindergarten, where a nice woman came out to meet them. She was the director of the kindergarten. The woman immediately warned me that the foundation would take care of the boys' expenses. Only 10 children came to them. There were a lot of interesting toys around. She also emphasized that the foundation would provide full financial support, but that it was necessary to bring your own blanket for sleeping and other things. They understood everything, but the director of the kindergarten did not allow them to visit very often throughout the day. If you visit whenever you want, the kid will be a little confused and not get used to it. It seemed to the young man that his brother was happy with everything and liked the teacher, and this was very encouraging. The boy was completely immersed in the process of drawing, while his brother filled out all the necessary documents for the kindergarten. While the boy was busy, the principal wanted to tell him that she had noticed the child's creative potential. But I also wanted to emphasize that it was necessary to check the boy's speech development. Given his age, his spoken language was developing rather slowly, and this was a cause for concern. And then he faced another test. He needed to undergo a full examination with his brother so that it would not be too late. The boy liked it very much, and before they knew it, he was changing his position. They enjoyed every minute of it. My brother was pleased that he could make every day a joyful day for his little brother. Suddenly, he received a message that his translation had been accepted, and it was just wonderful. He promised that he would earn a lot of money for them and buy the kid everything he wanted. The man who was working on the translation immediately contacted the boy. He was ready to offer him a job on the recommendation of the professor. He also added that if the guy does a good job, the payment for the next translations will be much higher. When he picked up his laptop from the repair shop, he still didn't understand why it wouldn't turn on. Outside their home, it worked quite well, but as soon as the boy came home, it immediately turned off. And when the kid came up to it, the computer turned on and started synchronizing with other objects near it. Everything was actually very mysterious, and he did not understand what to do next, as everything pointed to some kind of mysticism. What was happening was simply beyond explanation, but everything he learned could help him solve all his problems. The next morning, everything was as usual in the company, and all employees were preparing for a new working day. The man was in a very good mood, as he had managed to find a translator for a new work and was about to sign a contract with him. As soon as one of the employees heard this, he could not believe that his project was given to someone else. It made him very nervous. When he looked at the newbie's translation, he realized that everything was done very well, and the skills were present. The men also knew that the person who wrote the translation was the son of Lee Jung-hyuk himself, who had recently died tragically. The employee immediately realized that his son might have inherited a penchant for languages, but he also knew that the boy had no experience at all. The The manager tried to reassure his employee and pointed out that their company could not afford another novel and needed to work quickly, as they were already behind schedule. But at that moment, it became known that there were more important things to do, and we had to have a conversation about the new book. While the men decided to do more important things, the colleague was entrusted with signing the contract so as not to waste time. He was very angry with the newcomer, but he was also eager to meet him. Whenever Shihak had time, he played with his brother, of course. Since the little boy did not speak, Shi wanted his friend to learn to understand him without words. The friend realized that Shi Hyuk liked translating text so much that he even agreed to sign a contract. But he knew very well that without the professor's recommendation, he would not have received any offers. In the field of translation, translators needed at least 2 years to gain experience and 10 oral translations to raise their salaries. Soon after, the young men met to negotiate and sign their first contract. The worker handed him a regular contract and emphasized that many people were willing to work for less. He did not like it at all and decided not to tolerate such treatment. As soon as the man started talking to his interlocutor, he almost immediately suspected that he was being robbed of his contract. As soon as the young man heard such words, he immediately began to shout at the boy and emphasized that he had no right to say such things. But then the guy began to make a good argument and emphasized that he wanted to get the money before the book started selling properly. In conclusion, the man said that he was very good in this area, so no one could deceive him, even if they were quite smart. As soon as the hero realized who he was talking to, he quickly began to realize that he had to communicate with such a man in a different way because he was really starting to suspect something. After a while, the guy noticed that the contract was missing some information, and then he wanted to know what it was about. The interlocutor could not give normal arguments because he did not expect to meet such an intelligent person from the very beginning. Before talking to such a person, he had started reading various articles that described his field well, so he was quite knowledgeable. To prove the veracity of his words, the interlocutor began to dive into the past and tell how he worked in the library several years ago. But even this was not something the young man was going to take seriously, because he knew how many people did not want to work for a penny. Later, the man decided to get up and leave the place altogether, but his attacker did not expect him to be so well versed in this area. Because of all these problems, he decided that he would not sign the contract, so he decided that he had to leave. But in the end, he wanted to know if the director himself knew what contract the man had brought him in order for the young man to sign it. He decided to take the contract with him as evidence so that if the case went to court, he could use it as evidence that he was being cheated. The man also emphasized that the offender should never think of prosecuting him, because his career would simply be over. After this conversation, the man was very angry because his entire plan, which he had thought out to the smallest detail, simply collapsed in one moment. The child, who was nearby, looked at everything very carefully, but the man did not want his close brother to look at the dirty person. After a few minutes, the little boy decided to approach the man and give him some napkins to clean himself, but this only made his brother laugh. Taking him in their arms, they decided to go to a completely different place to somehow change the aura that was there at that moment. Recalling all those events, he realized that they really wanted to cheat him out of a large sum of money, and the young man also thought that the director had something to do with it. After a while, another man came up to him and asked if he would be okay if he just left the place. Then the man emphasized that the person he had just talked to was not a very good person, so he did not want to feel sorry for him. At times, he was a little worried because it was an offer he was really looking forward to, because the man had wanted to get rich for a long time. As soon as they decided to end their conversation, the man immediately received a call from a person with whom he did not really want to talk, but had to. As soon as he picked up the phone, no one was going to answer him, and this alarmed the man quite a bit, so he decided to ask again. First, he began to talk about the contract, which really turned out to be different from what he had initially expected, and this bothered him greatly. After a while, he emphasized that he had sent special photos of the contract to the man, and it was really different. This conversation ended, but a few minutes later a new one took place, and then the man clearly emphasized that he did not want illegal things to be done to him. When the conversation began to go further and further, the interlocutor asked if he was somehow involved, but the young man immediately denied such thoughts. Later, they arranged a special meeting together, and in a few minutes the man decided that he would come to the office himself and see everything. After this story, an acquaintance began to hug him very hard and emphasize that the man had really grown up because he was talking very intelligently. Thus, they realized that the young man no longer needed to look for another job to exist normally in this world, and they were happy about it. When evening came and they went to bed, the little child woke up quickly and wanted to talk to his brother. But when he didn't hear the answer to his question, he decided that he needed to go to the computer, and then he saw a familiar person there. Luckily, after a few minutes, he came to his family member and just started lying on his chest. The next morning, when they woke up, the man was surprised because he was having a hard time breathing, but it turned out to be because of the little boy. Looking at the clock, he realized that they needed to pack their things as quickly as possible and go about their business. As soon as they walked into the office, people began to pay all their attention to the boy, who was dressed very nicely and it suited them very well. Approaching one of the workers, the man decided to ask where he could solve his special problems, but then she wanted to know with whom he wanted to meet. But first, she decided to ask if she could take a photo of such a cute child sitting beautifully in her husband's arms and obeying him. But the girl was simply stunned when the man told her that he did not want her to take pictures of the child in any way. As it turned out, he just wanted to attract the girl's attention in this way and was just joking, but she didn't take it too well. Meanwhile, in another area, a man was doing his job very well and believed that children should not be used in any way. The boy, who continued to look over his shoulder, was looking at everything carefully, because there were many new people in front of him whom he had not seen. After a while, the man said that their workload had almost doubled because one of their employees had simply quit. The man did not like this news very much, but they decided to sign a special contract and discuss several events. After this event, the man was 100% sure that they would strengthen their cooperation and achieve some success, but for some reason the young man was upset. Then his partner decided to support him and repeatedly emphasized that they would still have money in their pockets. When they started discussing several ideas, one of them really appealed to the partner because he saw a great promise in it. Later, they decided that they needed to move to another location and also to give a tour of the office where the man was visiting for the first time. First, they decided to go through the rationalization department, which played an important role in this office. The young man did not know much about these business matters, so he decided to trust the man because he was an important person here. At that moment, the man decided to move to the other side, and then the young man asked the man if he and the child could sit down. But as soon as they got closer, they noticed people who were not very happy to see them in their department, but the man did not pay attention to this. At the moment, he saw one employee who was very nervous because he had a lot of work to do. Later, he decided to approach him and ask if the man needed any help, and then the worker asked if he had any experience in this work. Without hesitation, the young man began to tell him a lot of information that he knew, and then the worker was surprised. But when they still did not have a dialogue, the young man decided to go and look at other departments that were also in this office. But the worker was not going to just tell the man everything, so he decided that he had to come up with some method to stop him. Despite all this, the young man knew his decision, and the child was on his side, so he decided to analyze everything on his own. Later, a girl came up to him and asked if he could look at one thing that was very important. Despite the fact that he didn't really want to do it, he decided to look at the documents and analyze the text that was written there. After that, he decided to sit down on a chair and calmly analyze the text, and realized that it was an author's work that was quite well written. A few minutes later, a lot of workers were already near the man, wanting to see for themselves and understand what was wrong. Turning his head to them, the man asked them to calm down a bit, because he was not used to hearing a lot of pleasant words in his direction. But fortunately, the man who always went with the young man quickly intervened and said that this worker had helped them in so many ways. The man decided to take advantage of the moment when his companion detained the workers, and he decided to quickly leave the place, but he did not see the child next to him. Then he noticed how the little one wanted to prove a point. Then the boy and the man wondered what they had been talking about for so long. The hero, who was much older than this child, thanked him very much for having such a brother, because an older brother makes his work much easier. The man liked the fact that the two boys spoke so well to each other, and he was also stunned that the little child was not afraid of anyone at all. A few minutes later, the man returned to his companion, and they decided to discuss something but were met by an old man. The representative of their company was very interested in who the young man was standing next to the man, and it was at that moment that they decided they needed to get acquainted. At first, he decided to apologize to the newcomer that his employees had been doing their job very poorly, although the young man denied it. A few minutes later, he asked Director Hong to come over to him for a moment to talk about personal matters. As it turned out, the man wanted to discuss the fact that they still hadn't signed the necessary contract, but the director decided to please him with new news. After overhearing them talking about a certain man, the young man realized that he knew him very well, and that is why he decided to intervene in the case. He was quite happy to tell his past life stories, which he remembered well. Now the team has a new idea for a book, and it made the man who was still holding the child in his arms very happy. My little brother asked him a lot of questions about how they wanted to write the book and who it was about, and my husband in turn told him with great initiative. All team members really liked the child who wanted to know more and more information about their new book. Later, they began to discuss in which region of the world they should publish their book so that it would become extremely popular and everyone would earn enough money. The kid sitting next to him also realized that it was a pretty good idea, so they decided to take it seriously. Noticing his partner's interest, he suggested that they look at what they could get in the future together. But first, he wanted to personally familiarize himself with the material they were going to produce, and then he concluded that some things needed to be improved. After a while, they decided to look into this issue in more detail because it was quite important at the moment. After this offer, the man, who was a little older than the others, began to shake hands with his friend and was incredibly grateful for such a wonderful offer. But one of them realized that they had no time for that at the moment because she needed to concentrate her thoughts on something else entirely. Noticing how calm his partners were now, the man was surprised himself and did not know how to react. After a while, when the man saw that the baby was already very sad, he decided that he had to leave the place as soon as possible. After he left that institution, he realized that it was a very good decision because the baby started to be a little capricious. Looking at the child, he was incredibly grateful to him, because only because of his appearance could he have a good influence on the first opinion. When his brother earned some money, he suggested going to a restaurant, and the kid immediately supported this wonderful idea. They really liked the food that the waiters brought them, but as it turned out, not everyone liked it so much. Their attention was drawn to a boy who was spinning very much in different directions and did not want to try anything new. The mother, who tried to talk to him very politely, asked him to taste at least one spoonful because it was necessary for his health. Then the woman asked the boy to turn his head and look at the boy, who obeyed his elders and ate everything. The young men were sitting very close to each other, and then the boy decided to ask if it was really that good, but the stranger simply confirmed his words. As soon as he tasted one spoonful, he was incredibly surprised at how delicious the food tasted. After they all left the institution. At the time, the boy was very happy to meet such a young man, but his sister had a different attitude. As soon as the brothers were alone again, the older one immediately wanted to know if the baby liked to communicate with other children. At that moment, the man wondered when his brother would finally go to kindergarten and whether he would be able to communicate normally with his peers. When he woke up again the next morning, he noticed that the boy was sleeping on his body again. Unfortunately, that day the man was not destined to have a normal day because he did not have enough strength after negotiating with important people. Despite all this, the guy was well aware that he had to do his daily routine like every day, despite his condition. The little boy always tried to help in some way, but unfortunately he was not as educated as his older brother. Looking at Shihu, he did not understand why he always liked this tablet so much, which was usually on the table, although it showed almost nothing. At first, he wanted to find out some new information that was written about in the news or published by various groups in which he was involved, as well as to see the development of his relative. Having found what he needed, he decided to analyze one graph that was responsible for the development of the child. After analyzing all these events, he realized that his younger brother spoke very poorly. Without hesitation, he decided to take the little boy to a specialist to make a specific conclusion. But before he could talk to the doctor, the child quickly took off his shoes and started playing with other children. A boy with whom they were sitting in a restaurant asked the young man if he also went to such a section. The older brother did not expect to see such people himself, because he almost never noticed strangers he had recently seen in front of him. Pointing at the boy, he began to tell him that the previous day they had seen each other in a restaurant and even had lunch together. The woman was surprised to hear this, so she turned to the older people who were more knowledgeable about it, but they started laughing. The older man introduced himself first, and he was quite polite and told us a little about his little brother. The guy started talking about himself a little bit because he was very proud of his mother, so he decided to tell some information about her. When the boys were alone, then one of them asked if the boy liked to play ball. When he didn't hear an answer to his questions, he decided to kick the ball with all his might because he was convinced that everyone loved to play football. After he realized that his new friend did not know how to play football, then the boy took the initiative and decided to teach his friend. The mother, who continued to watch closely with her child, told the child's older brother that she would be happy to look after them. The teacher was convinced that in such a kindergarten, the boy would enjoy socializing with other children, of which there were plenty. Meanwhile, the man began to think back to the past when he saw his brother's development statistics. At the time, he was at a loss as to what to do and decided that the first thing to do was to see a specialty doctor. So without hesitation, as soon as the boys went to play, he decided to personally talk to the woman who was in charge. After analyzing the chart given to her by her husband, she also concluded that the child most likely had some problems. As he approached the woman, he wanted to hear some normal conclusion from what he had seen, because he was worried about his younger relative. The woman began to calm her husband down and told him a story about how they had similar children and their doctor always helped them. The educator also emphasized that this woman was often called a very beautiful person who was also a very good specialist. After listening to all these stories, he wanted the woman to call her as soon as possible and tell their story. After they had solved all their questions, they wanted to see how the boys who had recently become friends communicated with each other. At that moment, he heard one of the boys shout very loudly that he had hit the other with the ball, and then the man started to get a little nervous. As he got closer, he saw his little brother standing there, doing nothing to deflect the ball. As soon as the boy noticed that his partner scored a beautiful goal thanks to his head, he immediately started shouting loudly and cheering for him. His older brother, being a close person, decided to be happy for him too, because he saw it with his own eyes and liked it a lot. The women who stood by and discussed it all noticed that the brothers were incredibly close people who cared for each other very much. After some time, they were back in their home, and then the brother said that the younger one could go play while he was preparing food. The child decided to listen to his brother right away and decided to draw in the same place as the expensive equipment. Seeing all this with his own eyes, the brother did not shout at the little child, but simply called him to eat and recuperate after the game. When he came closer, he was a little scared because he didn't know how to clean it all, but he realized that his brother had the ability of an artist. The brother decided to emphasize that this was not the right thing to do, but he was not going to yell at the child because she did not know that this was not the right thing to do. Before he wiped it all off, he decided to take a picture so that he could look back on these photos in the future and enjoy such moments. After that, they decided that they would clean it all very well so that the equipment would look like it used to. When it was time for bed, the older brother fell asleep quickly because he was exhausted after such a day. But the little one could not fall asleep. When he finally got bored, he decided to go to his room and saw his tablet shining very brightly again. As soon as he touched him, something unknown hit his hand, and then the kid just fell to the floor. When he was sleeping, he had a terrible dream where his little brother was in the car before the accident. As soon as he woke up, he was screaming, but not his own scream because of the horror he had seen in his dream. But when he paid attention, he noticed that the boy had somehow ended up on the floor and was sleeping soundly. When he touched him, he realized that something was wrong. The boy's body was very hot, so he grabbed him in his arms and quickly went to the doctor. Then he realized that the child was sick, and he had only been sleeping all along. He looked at his little brother and realized that he had to take even more care of him because he had made such a promise from the very beginning. Apparently, Shihek simply did not notice that his little brother's condition had suddenly deteriorated. Once they were in the hospital, the young man said that his little brother had a high fever. The nurse immediately asked me to calm down and to start with, just hand the baby over to her. As soon as the doctor appeared, the young man immediately began to bombard her with various questions about the boy. He was very worried that such a temperature could be due to various serious illnesses. His head was full of various diseases, but he had no headache, no rash, no vomiting, no cough, none of these symptoms. Meanwhile, the woman doctor said that the child's temperature was not falling, but everything else was in perfect order, so they had to wait a little, and he would definitely get better. The young man decided to calm down a bit and wait on the waiting bench. When he looked at the girl, he had no idea that they could have met under such circumstances. She immediately introduced herself as Sun A Na and said that she had received a call from the director of the kindergarten about the boy. Suddenly, he jumped up quickly when he heard his brother calling him. The boy tried to tell me that he was very cold, even wrote on paper. The doctor could not believe that his temperature had dropped so quickly, as it had been very high just a minute ago. The young man was extremely happy that the boy was not in pain and began to offer him something to eat and gain strength after the fever. Since they were already in the hospital, the girl suggested that little Shiha be examined immediately. While the doctor was filling out all the documents, both boys kept trying to play. And then the women called each other and discussed the boy's condition. The director of the kindergarten said that it was the first time she had ever seen a child speak only 2 words. As soon as everything was clear to her, she tried to figure out what to do next and what kind of examination she needed to have. It seemed to her that the boy believed that he had no need to speak correctly, so he was silent most of the time and was generally a healthy child. Since the brother understood the boy, he did not try to pronounce all the words as required. In other words, the woman was trying to convey that the child's brain had simply taken the easy way out. Then he decided that he was simply interfering with his brother's development all the time, because at his age, he needed to have an environment where he could learn to speak properly. After they talked, it became clear to the woman that the young man had some understanding of medicine. Finally, the doctor said that she did not see any need for an examination, so the young men could go home. As soon as the woman wanted to say goodbye to the boy, she noticed how he drew and was surprised that a child of that age had such abilities. The young man decided to tell them that they had many beautiful works by the boy, and all of them were simply masterpieces. It was at that moment that the boy remembered what happened when he bargained for his father's laptop, and the same thing could have happened to his brother when he touched his mother's tablet. He also wanted her to understand that his brother was a very sociable child and loved to communicate. In fact, he gestured a lot and tried to express his emotions well, but it was not his fault that not everyone was able to understand him. But she emphasized that if the situation did not change in a few months, then several tests would have to be done. His drawing of a penguin was very beautiful. The older brother always tried to praise his little artist. The next day, I didn't pay attention to the fact that the boy had such a fever, but he looked and behaved very energetically. Then he thought that if his brother had such drawing skills, it would be easy to enter an art institute in the future. At that moment, he was already planning his son's future and didn't even notice that he was calling him. Usually people chose what they were best at, but in this case the older brother wanted Shaha to do exactly what he liked. He also remembered his parents every time and did not know whether he would be able to replace them, but Shuhek did not have an answer to this question. But he was sure that he would do everything to ensure that his brother had everything. It was then that he decided to work on the story of a doctor who recalled all his surgeries that he had regretted all his life. The doctor in the story became young again after receiving a watch with a golden mechanism and was able to return to the past. When he started working on that book about the doctor, he realized that it was very interesting, and now it became clear why they chose this particular story for publication. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, he received a phone call. It was a colleague who wanted to clarify a couple of things about work. Having solved a couple of his questions, the man immediately offered Shihyuk to join his company after finishing his work. But since the young man was not interested at all, he pretended that there was a bad connection and hung up. He really wanted to contact the author whose book he was translating. This was a normal practice in order to make a good translation. They had been painting since the morning, and then Shuhek received a reply to his letter to the author of the book. My brother was overjoyed to receive a response from the author, who offered to keep in touch about the translation of his book. He was very pleased that his work was recognized, especially by the writer himself, and when he noticed his little boy's drawing, he realized that he had drawn his older brother. Whatever Shuhek did in those moments, the kids repeated everything after him, and it made both of them very funny. The next morning, when they wanted to have breakfast, the older brother noticed that something was wrong with the kid again. As it turned out, it was just his hair. They had to go to the hairdresser. Suddenly, as soon as they closed the door of their apartment, they met a very suspicious man. But as it turned out, he just wanted to get to know them and was their neighbor. He really liked the kid, and he talked about him throughout their conversation. The man said that he was an aspiring voice actor and was only 20 years old. After talking to him for a while, Shuhek decided that the young man was actually a normal person, although he had scared them a little at first. It was at that moment that the boy started to say something, and it was a real surprise for the young man. Then the neighbor decided to play along and started pretending to be a thief so that the boy would start protecting his brother. Since the guys had their own business, they were forced to leave their new friend and leave. And the neighbor added that he would send them a notice of the meeting of all the residents of that house next week. In the morning, they went to the hairdresser to make the kids' hair beautiful for kindergarten. The guy immediately showed me a photo of what the haircut was supposed to be like, and the master really liked it. But Shaha wanted to get his hair done with his brother, so he insisted that he cut his hair the same way as him. The hairstyle didn't look quite right for Shuhek's age, but he just couldn't refuse his brother. As soon as my friend saw this, he couldn't stop laughing. He didn't even believe that Shuhek would come to class looking like that. The young man laughed so hard that he forgot to tell the news he wanted to share. Later, he added that the university added another condition for graduation. He had to get confirmation of his internship, which was on vacation. It was during the holidays that this was problematic, because there was no one to leave my little brother with, or to choose a place where I could go with my children. He had a little time to think and make a decision because school hadn't really started yet and he had to decide on a kindergarten. The friend hadn't seen them for only a few days and only heard how well the boy started talking, and he was very surprised. The next day was the first day of school, and the younger one had his first full day at kindergarten, so they were both in a hurry. No matter how hard they tried, they were still late. Classes started at 9, then they had to work, and after work they had to pick up their brother at 3. The woman who was the kindergarten teacher came out to them immediately. She really liked the little boy with whom she would spend the whole day. The young man tried to explain that he wanted to visit him during the day, but the principal did not allow it, but wanted the boy not to worry because they were not going to be separated for long. He knelt down in front of him and wanted to tell him something else, but it was a little too late. When Shihu was called by another little boy like him, he immediately ran off to play and forgot about his brother. Suddenly he came back and gave him a small napkin. His brother wanted Heck to think about him all day when he looked at the napkin. While he was studying, he realized that he missed his son very much and thought about him every minute, and there were times when he was even distracted. Suddenly, his classmate came up to him and wanted to get to know him. She immediately introduced herself and said her name was Soo Hyuk. Then he remembered that she also came to his parents' funerals. He even thought that the girl wanted to cheer him up a bit, but he didn't really have time to talk. The girl didn't want to impose, so she complimented him on his hair and went about her business. After the break, a professor came to the lecture and immediately warned that his course would require a lot of work, so if someone was not ready, he asked them to leave. Shihek immediately thought it was a bit cruel and didn't want him to have less time with his brother. The man also warned that he had added a lot of new things to his course, so there would be a lot of constant discussion. The professor said that they had to start studying seriously next week, and he wanted to let them go a little earlier from the first lecture. He realized that if they conducted research at every lecture, then he would definitely be finished, because he would not see the kid at all. But since Professor Kim helped him a lot, it would definitely be rude to refuse his course. Shihek was supposed to attend all classes, even if he had to take the fall for the whole team on group projects. But he didn't know who to team up with yet. But still, there was only one option. This was his new acquaintance, and she already had 2 in her team. His fellow students were not at all opposed to the young man joining them. He tried to explain to everyone that in order to win, they had to understand their roles in the team, because the professor could play them against each other. First, we had to choose a person who could make decisions on the fly and was able to quickly adapt to the role in the discussion. We also had to choose one boring person who could do research all the time. For all his requirements, she knew exactly one young man, and it was him. In fact, he had all the qualities he had listed. The team didn't want to dump all the work on him, but they decided that he could be the leader of their group. The girl knew very well that he could have had a large number of views. Once they had decided on everything, Shih-hyuk decided that she was a good fit for the role of his assistant. That's when she decided that she would do whatever was needed for the team. But when she got a little upset and angry with her friend, she said that his hairstyle looked like a pot. Now it was clear that she had lied about the hairstyle in the first place. Meanwhile, my little brother in the kindergarten kept looking at the clock and couldn't wait for 3 o'clock, but many children asked him to play. The girl decided to play a family and wanted to be a mom, but Shiha didn't speak very well, so it was hard to understand who he wanted to be. All the kids had a great time and laughed at the boy who thought he was a robot. My brother remembered all the words of the kindergarten director well, but he was very worried about his brother and still wanted to see how he was doing. When a friend called him and invited him to lunch, he naturally said that he had been near the kindergarten and watched the kid. As soon as Shuhek decided to enter the group, the teacher immediately decided to show him that all the children were resting, including his little brother. The young man decided not to wait long and wake the boy up. They really missed each other a lot. Shihek promised that they would spend that day together and enjoy each other's company. Their friend did not really understand why they behaved this way because he had no brother or sister to miss. While the children were in kindergarten, they tried to teach them how to clean up after themselves, make their beds, and much more. So every time his brother took him away, he tried to help the kids, but when other children saw it all, they also wanted his help. All the children wanted to play with him and climbed into his arms. They were really having a lot of fun. A little later, the young man decided to change his hairstyle, but his brother didn't really like it. The guy tried to explain that he had to go to school and didn't want to be laughed at. That particular day, They had a group lesson after school, and afterwards everyone was going to go out to celebrate. The girl was well aware of Shi Hyuk's situation, so she wanted to meet his brother and didn't mind him taking him with her. It seemed to him that his classmate's character was not really bad, and she treated him well. At that moment, I received a call from the director, who was simply delighted with Shihek's translation, and also believed that the guy was simply born for such work. He kept listening to how the man couldn't stop admiring him and how he actually made all the work refuted, so he invited him to work for his company. Shihek was very pleased that his work was credited and he would be paid at the end of the week. While they were walking, the guy was discussing all the details of his next job. But since the guy was already late, he couldn't continue the conversation and had to end it. When he arrived at the university, he saw his friend talking to a man, but it was clear from her expression that she was not happy. The young man could not keep up with the girl and kept trying to get her interested in some way. So Shi Hyuk's appearance changed the situation a bit. She immediately quickly stopped her conversation and wanted to discuss everything with Shi Hyuk, as it was much more interesting with him. But her friend kept asking her to do this to him and wanted to offer a lot of material he had with him. At that very moment, the kid started pointing and trying to say something to the young man, who was not pleasant to everyone. As soon as she saw her little brother, she could not contain her emotions. She liked him very much and introduced herself by her name. While the young people were paying attention to the kid and laughing, the girl's friend stood behind the wall and watched them. He really didn't like it, especially her attitude toward him. The man did not know what had happened to the girl, but he was sure that now this problem would be finally solved, although the woman had a different opinion. When they started talking about one person, the girl also emphasized that this person was the same age as her husband. He listened to all the words with great pleasure, and he did not forget about his little brother who was always sitting in his arms. As soon as people saw the baby with their own eyes, they immediately noticed how cute he was and wanted to hug him. After that, people just couldn't concentrate on their work properly because they had such a cute creature standing in front of them. When the man realized that the baby was not letting people work, he decided that he needed to get him interested in drawing somehow. In the meantime, the man himself decided to go to a lecture and tell people about the problems of bullying, which was quite popular even at work. One girl decided to raise her hand and asked her husband what he would do if he found out that someone was going to be bullied. The man thought hard about this question because he believed that this was a difficult situation that needed to be addressed from the very beginning. After that, their conversations turned to the team, and then the girl wanted to know what special strategy they had to succeed. Then the man began to realize that their competitors could easily analyze the market and start planning their next steps. In this case, she realized that their team would be in danger, and then she wanted to hear some constructive solution from her husband. Then he realized that if their competitors were to think logically, they had to come up with some other way around it. When he finally took his baby to kindergarten, he told him that today was a very important day for him. And then he turned to Shiha again and asked him to start going to his friends with whom he loved to play so much. But as it turned out, it was really hard for the brothers to be without each other, because they were always used to being together no matter what. A teacher decided to enter their dialogue and asked the man to go about his business because he was distracting his child. After that, she looked into the child's eyes for a long time, but Shiha did not really understand what the woman's strange reaction was about. As soon as she turned her head in the other direction, she immediately noticed the man still standing there saying goodbye to his brother. Later, his friends began to approach the boy and were incredibly happy to see him back in their company. At first, his friend decided to ask why the boy was standing there for so long and didn't want to come to them at all. The young man also began to tell us that when his mother was very nervous, she made very interesting movements, and because of this, the boy thought that his friend's brother did the same. After a while, when the boy finally found himself in the company of friends, it became easier for him not to think about his brother. It didn't take long for the boy's sister to come to them, and she was also happy to talk to the young man. Later, the boy decided to show what they liked to do with his brother and then gave his friend a big hug. The children began to play, and then a woman decided to intervene in their games and said that today they had a very interesting atmosphere. Meanwhile, the man began to follow the lecture again, where he was the best student and knew almost everything the teacher was talking about. At that moment, he noticed that a very strange man was looking at him directly in the face, and then the man wanted to know what was going on. The boy communicated very well with the girl who always sat next to him, and then he wanted to find out from her what they said about this strange young man. Then the girl turned her head in the other direction and said that this guy had a very bad reputation because he often did bad things. The girl denied his words, and as it turned out, this reputation was connected with someone else, but she wanted to tell it later. The guy immediately agreed to this because he realized that there was going to be a lecture that he wanted to listen to. But before the lesson started, she told the boy to be a little more confident because she thought it was a very important character trait in a person. At that moment, he said that before the girl went outside, she had to look in different directions because she forgot to take off her head accessories. And the man sitting behind me was constantly very nervous, and it was obvious because he did not try to hide his sincere reaction at all. When they looked at this man from different angles, they noticed that he was incredibly aggressive towards the people around him. At the time, the older brother was convinced that they had made a big mistake because now he was 100% sure that they would defeat their opponents. After a few minutes, the teacher said that they were about to start discussions, and then the guy who liked to be nervous decided to introduce his group. On that day, their team was tasked with explaining bullying from different angles and how it could be easily prevented. And when his story came to an end, he said that they had managed to find a special method that solves this problem. After a while, they decided to ask the man a few questions, but he answered all of them quite confidently. She was one of those people who loved to discuss, so she kept asking questions. When the man noticed that the person who was really telling his story had answers to all the questions, then he decided to join in. At first, he wanted to know if the young man knew of a way to prevent bullying so that it would never happen again. Despite this difficult question, the man still stood firmly on his feet and was confident in his abilities no matter what, so he continued to answer. After a while, the young man was convinced that there was a mistake in the statistics that the man showed him that he had not seen at all. Such loud words made the man very angry, and then he began to behave differently because he was convinced that the statistics had always been true. As it turned out, the man was not just discussing for no reason because his group had also done a special study and could draw conclusions about such situations. Despite all this, he continued to talk and prove that it was the young man who was right in this situation, and then the man simply did not know what to say. He was also very interested in the situation when the police cannot help a girl properly, and for example, she starts to feel bad because of this. Another guy who was obviously well versed in the topic joined their discussion and began to express his subjective opinion as well. For quite a while she remained silent and listened to all this, but at some point she decided to join the discussion and began to give some facts. The woman was convinced that victims of bullying were afraid in most cases to simply talk about their negative experiences. With his eyes lowered, the man just continued to listen to her, and when he heard her words, he was convinced that the girl was really right and knew what she was saying. But before he could express his opinion, people started discussing again, and then the man only added that in most cases, the school did not help at all. He gave some examples from his life when a class teacher simply did nothing at all and stood still, even though he knew there was a problem. Also, when it came to court, the victims simply could not formulate their opinions properly and make a proper accusation against the perpetrator. The man who presented his project simply did not know how to react to this, so he shouted loudly and asked the man if he had a way out of that situation. When they finally left the hall, they were incredibly happy that thanks to their husband, they had managed to present their work well. The girl who was walking next to her husband began to thank her partners because she really realized that thanks to them, they had done everything so successfully. But the man was convinced that they were very lucky because the competitor made one very big mistake that he caught in a flash. The girl also often came to the point where at the end of the debate, they actually had a small conflict with their competitors. When they began to recall these events again, the man decided to get up from his chair and come closer to the young man. He began to give some examples from psychology that really influenced this situation much more than the opponent thought. He cited some examples of victims who were simply left alone with their thoughts and ended up with a very bad end to their lives. In this story, the representative of his work did not consider the fact that the person simply could not ask for help when it was needed. After a while, the girl began to think that all the results of the discussion they had had should soon be in their hands. And then he decided that he had to follow his younger brother, but then the girl wanted him to taste delicious dishes with them in a restaurant. Finally, when he picked up his favorite relative, then they decided to go home to get some rest after such a day. But as soon as the older brother came to the door, he noticed a strange note that said that all the people who lived in this house were invited to dinner. After a while, they met a rather tall man on their way who asked if people had seen the invitation yet. When my older brother started using the first name with the man, he asked that the young man not call him that because he was only 20 years old. The younger brother, who always sat behind his relative, was very afraid of strangers, especially such big ones. The man immediately noticed that Shi-ha was a rather calm child, so he decided not to bother him. Later, the young man asked what the idea was. Then the man said that he liked to organize such evenings because it brought all the residents together very well. At the end of the conversation, the man said that only good people who loved children very much would attend the meeting, so the boy could also attend such an event. The next morning, as soon as he woke up, he immediately realized that he hadn't gained any strength at all after working until late in the evening. But before he could sit quietly, his brother came to him and immediately began to hug him. After a while, he decided that he would lie on the couch with his relative for a while longer, because he didn't want to get up. Shi-ha, in turn, slept very well that day, so he wanted to start doing something as soon as possible because he had enough energy to do so. After a while, he realized that he had to get up, despite the fact that his body was very reluctant to do so. The younger brother got ready pretty quickly, but the older one didn't like that he was in such a hurry, so he asked the boy to wait for him. At first, he wanted to tuck the baby in so that he would feel good when he played. After a while, the boy started running around the room again and wanted to find what he needed so badly, but the man just fell asleep. When he realized that he didn't have the strength to argue with the guy, he decided that he should just let him take everything he wanted. Having put on all his necessary things, he was completely ready to go to visit the people who were waiting for him so much. Since childhood, Shi-ha has been very fond of various penguins, so he had many things in his wardrobe that were associated with these animals. Later, they knocked on the door, and a man opened it for them, who was already waiting for another guest with a group of people. As soon as people noticed a very young child in front of them, they immediately greeted him and began to tell him what floors they were from, and also asked how old the boy was. As they continued walking with the man, he asked if the boy had eaten fried chicken, but the older brother did not know what to say because his relative had never eaten such a thing. After a while, as he approached the delicious food, the boy realized that it looked very appetizing and wanted to try it as soon as possible. As soon as the little boy first took a bite of chicken, everyone held their breath because they didn't know if he would like it. And then no one was surprised when the guy said it was incredibly tasty, and everyone around him was happy for him. The neighbor told the little boy to eat more, and in the future he would become as big as him, but this only scared the kid. The man continued to smile and emphasized that he didn't really mean to scare anyone. It just happened for some reason, but he still wanted to show the boy something. Then the TV turned on and started showing a penguin cartoon in which the main character wanted to defeat all the thieves. The man was calmly watching this episode, but at some point his older brother noticed his strange smile and facial expression. A second later, the man got to his feet and began to act as if he were a real thief who wanted to steal the older brother from the baby. But then the boy stood in his way and said that he would never give his older brother to some thief. People began to support the boy so that he could show his strength to his sworn enemy like a real emperor penguin. But as it turned out, the man was very good at playing different roles, so he decided that he had to keep fighting. Shi-ha was not afraid at all, and then he decided to make the first stab at the man's leg, but in fact he did not feel it at all. To play along, he fell down and started talking about how he had lost to such a strong penguin emperor whom he had never seen before. And then the boy was given a real sword, crown, and cloak, and after that he really began to feel like a cartoon character. The man thanked them for making his younger brother so happy, but people were only too happy to do such good things for children. When they decided to go home, after all, then the guy wanted to talk about the emotions of his younger relative, who was just delighted. Later, he came to the next class, and the teacher told him that they had prepared special materials for the next classes. At that moment, the girl was also by his side because she wanted to prepare well so as not to fail the upcoming exam. After she realized that she too had finished all the lectures, she suggested that her husband go out for a good meal. A second later, his phone rang and he asked the beautiful woman to wait for him because it was very important. At first, the handset was cutting his ears very much, so he took the gadget away and wanted to turn down the sound a bit so he could talk comfortably. Then he was clearly told that a very famous writer wanted to meet with him personally to discuss some details of the work. But as it turned out, the man was not an easy writer and wanted to talk to the man's younger brother, who he also liked. Meanwhile, the children in the kindergarten were telling their life stories, and then the boy asked if the young man knew what his grandmother called him. Shi-ha didn't know the answer to this question, so he decided to just keep quiet, and his brothers and sister started telling stories that he liked very much. After a while, when they played a lot of games, they no longer knew what to do to entertain themselves. Then the child suggested a very good game, which his friend immediately agreed to play because he also knew about the cartoon. The woman who was watching all this was simply stunned by how well the boys behaved. But before they could finish playing, Shiha saw his older brother, who had finally come to pick him up after kindergarten. The younger brother immediately wanted to tell his relative that they only wanted to play penguin, and fortunately he understood right away. Suddenly, other children began to attack him, and they also wanted the man to hug them for as long as possible because the young man told everyone how cool it was. But first, he still wanted to talk to his brother, who missed him very much all the time he was in the kindergarten. Despite his relative, he said that the man would always remain his closest person, regardless of any children. When they came home, the boy immediately began to draw very beautiful pictures, and his brother liked it. After he saw how well his brother painted, he suggested to him the idea of taking pictures of these photos and sending them to social networks. Meanwhile, the girl told everyone that they were going to go on a very interesting trip to a special strawberry farm that day. She noticed with her own eyes that two men had already sat at the very back, and added that everyone who was riding with them on the bus today had to fasten their seatbelts. Then the man noticed how disappointed Hannah was because she did not receive so much attention and did not have many friends, and then the man wanted to cheer her up somehow. And later he found out that the guy was a good match for the girl, so he decided that he definitely needed to talk to her. But before they could finish speaking, someone started whispering in a strange voice, and then the man noticed the woman sitting across from them. But when her husband wanted to ask her personally what the girl had told him, she decided that it was not necessary to discuss it at all. A woman who was a teacher that day decided to congratulate another participant who had dared to go on such a trip with them. Meanwhile, the man began to recall those events when he was talking to people on the phone and discussing some events. He concluded that the moment he hung up the phone, the girl heard the whole conversation and realized where he was going. Without hesitation, she realized that she had to use this chance, so she asked her husband to take her with him. The young man was quite surprised when he saw the girl on the bus anyway, but he realized that he could not influence anything. Meanwhile, all the children who were traveling with the man began to fall on his feet, and this made him feel very uncomfortable. After the girl took quite a few photos, he asked her not to do it again because it was unpleasant for him. A few minutes later, the young man woke up and was quite surprised because it was his first trip, which he had not expected to take from the very beginning. When they arrived at this farm, the first thing the man did was to suggest that they take lots of photos because they could look back on them later and remember such a wonderful time. The children were incredibly happy to finally get to such a wonderful place that they had been dreaming of seeing with their own eyes for so long. A second later, the man noticed the person he had been planning to meet for a long time, and then she was happy to see the long-awaited guest in front of her. The man who played the most important role here was also happy to see all the nice guests, and wanted to talk to them as soon as possible. As soon as the young man saw such a legendary personality in front of him, he immediately wanted to emphasize what he wanted to write. From the very beginning, he realized that he needed to build at least some kind of dialogue with such a person for further cooperation. As soon as the manager saw him with his own eyes, Shai-ha immediately decided to greet him, and he was pleasantly surprised by the boy's childhood appearance. The little children realized that they had to leave the area quickly and go pick strawberries to enjoy these berries. The director realized that there was no need to take away anyone's time, so he suggested that they all go quietly and see how it looked. First of all, he showed the children special baskets in which they had to collect all the berries they could see with their own eyes. At first, he wanted to thank the man for hosting them in such a beautiful area, but the director did not want to hear it because he believed it was his duty. After all this, the men decided that they needed to discuss the translation in person, as well as how the text should be written. But as it turned out, the manager was not going to talk to the man from the very beginning because he wanted him to do his job, and then they would be able to communicate normally. Looking at all the little children, the man noticed how they were all eager to take the initiative to pick strawberries, which were plentiful. Shiha looked very carefully at all the strawberries he saw in front of him and realized that he had to choose only the best berries. But after that, his relative decided to talk to him personally to tell him how to pick strawberries properly. Later, the little brother showed his relative that he still managed to pick strawberries, but unfortunately not in such large quantities. The man decided to praise his little relative because he had been so hard-working since childhood, even though his peers were not always so. But before they could talk properly, other children ran up to them, who had also picked quite a good amount of strawberries. Meanwhile, after all that hard work, they decided to have a picnic, so they began to enjoy the food they had been provided with. The girl found the food much tastier than before because she knew how good food tasted after hard work. A few days ago, my husband tried to explain that he had to try and enter the Chinese market, even though it was very different. He was confident that their work would be very popular there, but he had to realize that negotiating with China would not be easy. You need to follow a clear plan and not be afraid of anything. They wanted to publish the book in English first, and if it was successful, their popularity would be assured. Now it was necessary for the translator to meet with the author of the book and discuss all the details. It even seemed to him that the author had warm feelings for Xu Hyuk. In the meantime, they could discuss everything in peace, and the author wanted to hear the young man's opinion as a translator. The man said that in his works he tried to use many aspects of Chinese culture, but he was very worried about how it would be read after translation into English. But the young man was positive and assured me that English translation was a job that had its merits. Despite the cultural differences, there was something special about each country, and especially about the English language. The author was still a little afraid that his books would not be so popular and then he would be forgotten. The young man understood the author of the book and all his experiences very well, so he was determined to do everything possible to make the work very good. In fact, he would really like the author of the book to trust him and his method of translation. Then we can see if the work will shine with new colors. He tried to emphasize that he had great respect for his works as a reader, so there was no need to worry that the translation might change the originality. Xu Hek tried to attract foreign students from the university to review the work, but if they didn't like the work, he was even ready to terminate the contract. Their conversation finally came to an end, and everyone was really happy with the result, and it was time for the guys to go home. The man even offered to take a few boxes of strawberries as a gift from him, to which the boy was very happy. Shiha was a little embarrassed and tried to explain that he wanted to share the strawberries with his uncle. Then Xu Hek's classmate came up to them and was also eager to try some of the beautiful strawberries. As soon as they got home, the boy immediately fell asleep as the day had been a bit tiring for him. It was actually his first trip, and the little kids were playing all the way. The brother was sure that the little boy enjoyed their day so much that he even saw more strawberries in his dreams. But while his brother fell asleep, he decided to get to work right away. This time, his task was to translate a work from Korean into English. He was well aware that in Korean, a sentence is usually omitted, while in English it had to be clearly emphasized so the sentence could change. Therefore, he had to preserve the originality and quality of his author's work. As soon as they woke up, the little brother immediately began to draw, and this was his favorite task. When they decided to look at the web where they had posted the penguin's drawing, they saw that it had gained a lot of likes and many good comments. At that very moment, their neighbor came to them and brought a bunch of different gifts. But when he looked at Shiha's drawing, he was simply speechless. He thought it was just incredible. He really had no words and believed that this was not just a child's drawing. It seemed to him that the kid was a real genius. The young man tried to tell him that his friend drew comics and applied for stickers, so he wanted them to be drawn by the kid. He kept thinking that Shiha had a few drawings and had just as many left to draw, but there was still time to spare. The brothers decided to think about his proposal for a while, because Shiha had just started painting, and they didn't want to overwhelm him too much. In fact, all the drawings seemed different, and it seemed that whatever he drew, he actually experienced it. His brother was well aware that through painting, Shiha could gain a lot of experience, not to mention money if he succeeded. Gaining popularity is not the first task in life. But Xu Hek began to ask his neighbor not to tell everyone much about his little brother, as interest was not always a good thing. After finishing all their conversations, the guilty tried to shake hands and say goodbye. But the little one immediately remembered the strawberries he wanted to treat his neighbor with. He was very pleased that the baby took care of him. He even shed a few tears. Now they decided to take the strawberries to Huang, but his brother wanted to do it himself. On the first floor, they met the owner of the building, who tried to explain to the woman that dogs were not allowed there. The woman did not want to hear anything that was said to her and considered her husband to be very stubborn, but he still insisted that she resolve the issue within a week. The guy saw that something was wrong with the kid. He kept pointing at something with his finger, and when they looked up, they saw that there was a cloud in the sky in the shape of a dog. As soon as they arrived at their friend's house, he was surprised that the kid could already pronounce his name and brought him so many strawberries. When they came out, the kid immediately started running, and it was not clear where he was going. Having barely caught up with Xu Hu, they both saw that a small dog was sitting in a box in the middle of the street. The boys decided to bring the dog to its owner, but she told them that it was definitely not her dog. Her dog went to her parents' house. but the kid felt that she must have been lying and kept pointing at her apartment. She didn't want to take the dog back at all, and got it only because she was just sad alone. But the owner of the house caught her, and now she had to get rid of the pet. Everyone stood on the doorstep of her apartment and did not know what to do with the dog, but the girl definitely did not like the boys being there. She even began to get annoyed with a kid she considered ill-mannered, and emphasized that the young man was better educated than a dog. Shuhek was very angry, but he kept his temper in check. He really didn't like the fact that she was using rude language, so he tried to calm her down a bit. Since the door was closed in front of them, they had no choice but to take the dog to their home, but then they would still have to find a permanent home for him. A neighbor also tried to help. He asked many people, but no one wanted to take in such an animal. Shihek said that he finally persuaded the owner to leave the dog for just one night, and then, if they did not find the owner, he would take him to an animal shelter. But it was a little scary, because if the owner was not found within 20 days, the animals were put to sleep. The boy was constantly with the dog and was definitely not ready to give it away, no matter how much his brother tried to explain that they were not allowed to keep animals. They both became very attached to each other. Shihek had never even seen his little boy so happy and emotional. He had already called everyone he could, but still no one wanted the dog, but he still had to take him somewhere. The young man knew well how scary it was to be abandoned, so he did not know how he could give the dog back. But he still had hope that he would be able to find a suitable family for him. The next morning, as soon as my brother woke up, he couldn't find his little boy anywhere. Neither he nor the dog was anywhere to be found. As soon as he picked up his tablet, he saw that it was covered with pictures of a dog. Now it was clear that he liked that dog very much. But he did find them. They both tried to hide in the closet, but as soon as the dog saw Shehyuk, it started barking. All of them really had a lot of fun, especially the little one. He tried to explain that he wanted Shiha to see only good things and feel only positive emotions, but sometimes in life something bad happened. The brother kept wanting the kid to understand him. He promised that he would find a good family for the dog, but the kid was not satisfied. He hugged him tightly and wanted him not to be upset, but the decision had to be made anyway. A woman in the kindergarten also said that they could not take in a dog because they had a lot of small children. Even if the dog is kind, the children will still be afraid. But she tried to emphasize that the situation was not hopeless. By doing so, she gave the young man a little hope. My little brother spent every moment with that puppy. He carried it in his arms, ran around, and just had fun. The teacher pointed her finger in the direction of where one of her friends lived, who had previously emphasized that he wanted to get a dog. I was sure that he could definitely like such a cute dog. When they went there were a lot of colorful chickens around, which Shiha liked. They were greeted by a very nice woman who was happy to see everyone, especially her new family member, a red dog. She seemed to be a good person. She immediately wanted to take the puppies in her arms. Everyone was really happy, and Shuhek hoped that she would take good care of such an animal. But the boy was very upset because in a few days he managed to get attached to him and did not want to say goodbye. It was also hard for her to see them separated, but everything could be fixed. The grandmother promised that the baby would be able to visit his ginger friend at any time,